already mentioned, and I was talking yesterday on the shift from geopolitics to geoeconomics. Today, I will be talking about issues indirectly related to the issues I've indicated yesterday, because I'll be talking about emerging economic powers, and I will not try to talk about the implications of new powers for global order. This would be the job of the next speaker, or for legal aspects, which we already heard. I would be trying to focus on issues of definition, and I think for a good reason. First of all, if we talk, I would like to explain why I'm going to talk about economic powers and not superpowers, global powers in general. When we were if we were debating similar topics sometime in the 1980s, we would be probably comparing military potentials, number of weapons. We will be coming sooner or later to the debate on nuclear weapons and their and balance on power in the world. And by balance of power, we would mean military power. Today, as our chair has already mentioned, it's the economy, is the trade that matters. So actually today, global powers are de facto economic powers. And the very problem begins if we want to say, okay, economic powers, but who are they? And sometimes when I'm talking, okay, there's something working, so excuse me for a minute, but sometimes when I'm talking to my colleagues, when we have a debate on economic issues, on emerging markets, superpowers, there are points when we hear that we're actually talking different language. When I say that, when I'm talking about emerging economies, I might think that one of them is Poland, the country I'm from. But, and for me, when mentioning emerging powers, emerging economic powers, it's obvious that I will include some Eastern European countries. But my fellow might think that it's only Brazil, Russia, India, or China, the countries hidden by the acronym BRICS, that are the actual emerging economic powers. Someone else would say, okay, but why are they emerging? They are economic powers already. And why do we say economic powers? Maybe we would say emerging markets, emerging economies, or maybe we should use different words like big emerging markets. Maybe we should differentiate between them. Maybe there are primary, secondary emerging markets, emerging economies, emerging powers. And that's what I want to talk about. As Dr. Bogusław has already mentioned, if we want to distinguish different categories of states, we need criteria for classification. And actually, the criteria of classification are needed to provide any definition. First, we need the criteria. Then, based on this criteria, we can build a definition. As we already heard, there's no internationally acceptable, there's no single definition of emerging market, emerging power, emerging economic power. As economists, we have a bit more freedom than the lawyers to classify countries, but still we face some problems. And first, I would like to indicate some of the problems, some different topics that come up when we're talking about economic powers, emerging markets. Then I would like to concentrate on the issues of the BRICS, which is, I admit, the abbreviation I really dislike, and also developments around this group of countries are not anything I would be personally particularly keen of, and I would try to explain it. I've entitled this part as a problem of common identity, and I will explain later what I mean by problematic here. And by the end, I would like to discuss a little bit indicated probably the further discussion during our panel. What's the relation between emerging economic powers and already established economic powers? Because there's another point which is important. If we have emerging economic powers, there must be some established economic powers. But can we identify them easily? Or maybe, as many as we are here, we would have different opinions on the classification. Possibly, either when classifying emerging markets, emerging economies, emerging superpowers, we would agree on few countries. But there would be debate on some. Some of us would choose differently. But starting with any attempts at classification, generally, whenever we're talking about emerging powers, the word emerging usually comes up with emerging markets or emerging economies. Let's treat these terms as synonymous for a minute. And if we browse through business and economist papers, academic journals, then we will see that as many as publications, possibly as many classifications of emerging economies. And what do they usually share in common is indication that generally emerging markets, and among them emerging powers, emerging economic powers, are nations that have either social or social and business activity in the process of very rapid growth, industrialization, maybe digitalization of economy, and these economies are not only marked by the huge GDP or similar indicators, but what's important here is the speed of growth. It's not necessarily the size of economy, because most of the countries would classify as emerging are not that impressive in relation to world GDP, but it's their speed of growth, very often two-digit one, that impresses. And another notion that would be common for most definitions of emerging economies, there would be often a statement that it's a type of transition between developed and developing economies. And if we talk about developed and developing economies, then we come to the greatest division in economics and in country classification we have today, and we've been having for the last decades, between, we can say it differently, north and south, between advanced and non-industrialized economies, if we use the older terminology. But generally, we're talking about developed and developing countries. And usually, the group of developing economies is said to be a part of the group of developing countries. And if we relate emerging markets to developing countries, we need to know what we mean by developing country. Again, it's nothing I could give you a clear definition. Not because I don't know it, because no one knows it. And there is of course, there are some criteria, but they always dependent on the source, dependent on the scholar, and inclusive personal views of the person providing and making the classification. Usually, by developing countries, we mean a group of between 120, maybe even up to 140 economies that face some development barriers, that face some development problems. Either low GNI per capita, which is usually correlated with some demographic issues, maybe late industrialization, maybe problems of poverty, inequality, poor healthcare. We could, or maybe colonial legacy. We could add these characteristics to a longer list, but usually it would be the wealth of the country that would come up first. And here we come to the most famous classification of countries prepared by the World Bank, which is based solely on the GNI per capita. I don't want to come into detail why such a classification is far from being perfect. I would just say that the World Bank classification is based on the actual GNI, not on purchasing power parity. So we have all the influence of exchange rate and also some accounting problems related to GNI computing. But generally, we have a classification with 4 groups of countries: low income, lower middle income, upper middle income, and high income. And the most general notion would be that high income is developed, the others are developing. Within the group of high income countries, there are also countries that are also members of Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So we have high income OECD countries, 31 I think at the moment, and this would be the world elite. We could say that these are the most advanced economies. Maybe we could call them major economic powers. If there could be 30 major economic powers, it's again disputable. So we should look for our emerging markets in the remaining group. Unfortunately, it would be not so easy. First of all, the World Bank doesn't use the term emerging in relation to economy or a country or economic power in any of its reports. In any of the classifications, there's not the word emerging appears. Moreover, if we were trying to distinguish emerging markets based on GNI, we would have to think of, again, what would be the level. Maybe it would be upper middle income economy, but then but if we stick to the GNI, then China, classified as lower middle income market, recently advanced to upper middle income, would be okay, emerging market. We all assume that China is one of the emerging markets, or maybe one of the markets that have already emerged. But this notion was present already 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, China, judging by the GNI per capita, was not among the countries that would advance fastest. So another criteria for distinguishing developing countries prepared by United Nations Development Program and based on Human Development Index classification still doesn't give much answer. Especially when we have human development, we're not referring solely to economic power and economic influence. There could be countries of huge economic influence, like China, but with relatively pure human development. There could be countries like Poland with great human development, but relatively lower GNI per capita. So again, the classification for developing developed countries doesn't give an answer where should we look for emerging markets, even though we keep in mind that there might be some kind of transitional between developed and developing countries. So let's look at more specific classifications, concentrating solely on emerging markets and emerging economies. And this term, maybe it's worth noting that the term emerging markets, emerging economies, and later emerging economic powers appeared first in the early 1980s, and this was done to relation to 4 markets of East Asia, known also as the Asian Tigers: South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong. Small economies, very fast growing, using the model of developmental state in order to boost industrialization. Another term you might come across would be state-led development in this case. And in this relation, it was said that these four markets are the emerging economic powers. So these are the markets that broke the barrier of underdevelopment. But then, okay, only four markets. If, as I mentioned before, we got different classifications, different sources